Hi, and welcome to Season 2 of That's Ruddy Mysterious, a podcast of short tales about true mysteries. What created the Potomsky Crater? Who was involved in the 1963 Great Train Robbery? I'm not going to solve those mysteries, but they'll be interesting to learn about. I'm your host, Kelly with an I. Transcripts and references for all episodes can be found at that'sruddymysterious.wordpress.com. No apostrophe and no exclamation point. Today's tale is about Gloria Ramirez. Gloria Ramirez was born on January 11th, 1963. She died on February 19th, 1994 at the age of 31. She was known as the Toxic Lady because during her last visit to the emergency department, several medical personnel became ill. What happened? Gloria Ramirez lived in Riverside, California. She had 2 children, aged 12 and 9, as well as a live-in boyfriend named Johnny Estrada. 6 weeks prior to her death, Ramirez had been diagnosed with late-stage cervical cancer. On February 19, 1994, Estrada called for an ambulance and Gloria Ramirez was rushed to General Hospital in Riverside, suffering from a rapid heartbeat, trouble breathing, nausea, and a drop in blood pressure. She could barely breathe and answered questions in incoherent sentences. Doctors and nurses immediately began life-saving procedures but were ultimately unsuccessful. They injected drugs to normalize Gloria's vital signs, but the drugs didn't work. When the nurses removed Gloria's shirt for defibrillation, they noticed a strange oily sheen on Gloria's skin. They also noticed a garlicky odor coming from Gloria's mouth. When placing a syringe to get a blood sample, they noticed that Gloria's blood smelled like ammonia. There were also manila-colored particles floating in Gloria's blood. The doctors checked the blood and agreed with the nurses that there was something wrong. An attending nurse began to faint. Then another nurse began having trouble breathing. A third nurse passed out and couldn't move her arms or legs upon awakening. All in all, 6 people began having strange symptoms after coming into contact with Ramirez and could not treat her anymore. The hospital later said that 23 of the 37 staff in the emergency room that night experienced at least one symptom. The symptoms included shortness of breath, muscle spasms, convulsions, fainting, nausea, and temporary paralysis. Some of the staff themselves ended up in the hospital for up to 10 days after treating Gloria Ramirez. 45 minutes after her arrival, at about 8:50 p.m., Gloria Ramirez was dead. Staff evacuated the emergency room at 10:30 p.m., a little over an hour and a half after Ramirez's death. After Ramirez's death, a special team came into the emergency room with hazmat suits on. They searched the ER for signs of poison, gas, toxins, and other foreign substances. They found nothing to explain the symptoms the staff had experienced. The team put Ramirez's body into a sealed aluminum casket. A week later, an autopsy was performed on Ramirez's body. The autopsy team all wore hazmat suits. When all was said and done, 3 autopsies were performed on Gloria Ramirez's body. The first was done 6 days after Ramirez died. The second was 6 weeks later, and the third was right before Ramirez was buried, and which was demanded and paid for by her family. The first autopsy showed that Ramirez had died of natural causes, but the later autopsies revealed she died from something other than natural causes. The coroners could not explain the conflict. The autopsy that had been performed 6 weeks after Ramirez's death on March 25th found signs of Tylenol, lidocaine, codeine, and Tegan, a medication for nausea, in Ramirez's system. Tegan breaks down into amines in the body. Amines are related to ammonia, so could that explain the ammonia smell in Ramirez's blood? The autopsy also found large amounts of dimethylsulfone, or DMSO, in Ramirez's blood and tissues. DMSO occurs naturally in the human body and breaks down into other substances. DMSO has a 3-day half-life. There was enough of this substance in Ramirez's body to register at 3 times the normal amount 6 weeks following her death. On April 12, 1994, a county official announced that Gloria Ramirez had died of heart failure due to kidney failure caused by late-stage cervical cancer. The official said that there was too little of the unusual substances in her blood to have caused Ramirez's death. The official agreed that there were elevated amounts of DMSO and ammonia in Ramirez's body, but not at levels high enough to kill. Officials released the body to the family for burial 2 months after Ramirez's death. The delay was because officials were concerned about toxicity. Ramirez's family was very upset. Gloria's sister blamed the deplorable conditions at the hospital for her sister's death. The facility had been cited in the past, but had never received citations for anything that would explain Ramirez's death. An investigation into the incident lasted several months. It concluded that the hospital staff had suffered from a mass sociogenic illness caused by the odor coming from Ramirez's body. In other words, they suffered from mass hysteria linked to the odor. The medical staff pushed the coroner to take a closer look. Patrick Grant from the Livermore Forensic Science Center said that Ramirez had covered her skin with DMSO, possibly in an attempt to cure her cancer. In 1965, DMSO was labeled as a toxic substance by medical science. Prior to this, it was used as something of a cure-all. In the 1960s, research showed that DMSO relieved pain and reduced anxiety. A study in mice, however, showed that DMSO could ruin eyesight. An underground following of DMSO as a cure-all started. By the late 1970s, it could only be found in degreasers that could be found in hardware stores. The DMSO in degreasers is 99% pure. The formula in muscle creams in the 1960s was less concentrated. When DMSO hits oxygen, it converts to dimethyl sulfate. Dimethyl sulfate as a gas destroys the cells in the lungs, eyes, and mouth. When it gets into the body, it causes convulsions, delirium, and paralysis. Of the 20 symptoms noticed the night of Ramirez's death, 19 match symptoms of exposure to dimethyl sulfate vapors. Therefore, if Ramirez used DMSO, it could have been the cause of the symptoms. Ramirez's family denied that she ever used DMSO. They claim that the hospital made some errors that night and were trying to lay the blame on Ramirez to cover them up. On April 30th, 1994, the Washington Post published an article about Gloria Ramirez. The article said that after 2 months and 3 autopsies, the hospital was still unsure what caused the illness in the emergency department. They were able to determine that Ramirez died of heart and kidney failure, and the case was closed. The family hired an independent pathologist, Richard Fukumoto, who said that Gloria Ramirez didn't die of cancer. The family accused the county of bungling the investigation. They said that the investigation concealed unsafe conditions at Riverside Hospital. Maggie Ramirez, Gloria's sister, said it takes them 10 weeks to say she died of cancer. I don't believe anything the county officials or the coroner says. She believed that her sister had begun chemotherapy and that the type of cancer Gloria had was not supposed to be deadly. Michael Baden, former chief medical examiner for New York City, said that there was no way that fumes could have come from Gloria Ramirez's body and hurt people. He continued that the idea of that being a possibility went out with the Dark Ages. He concluded, dead bodies don't make people sick. The investigation was bungled from the beginning. A top-level investigator in the county coroner's office committed suicide a month into the investigation. It's possible they did this because of the pressure of the case. A week before the Washington Post article was published, the county announced that the syringe used to draw blood from Ramirez was discarded. This was a key piece of evidence. Brian Taylor was Gloria Ramirez's reverend. he talked about that bizarre, tragic incident in the hospital emergency room that took her life. He maintained that the hospital is likely to blame for the toxic fumes that took her life. What caused Gloria Ramirez's death? Did her body really make all those healthcare workers ill, or was it all just some form of mass hysteria? What do you think? Thanks for listening to today's episode of That's Ruddy Mysterious. I'm your host, Kelly with an I. If you enjoyed this episode, leave a review and follow That's Ruddy Mysterious to be updated about new episodes. Tune in next Tuesday for another thought-provoking tale.